several conversations about how lonely people are becoming in the modern world. On so many occasions, people have spoken about the increasing loneliness trends among the youth, the increasing disconnection between people that live within the world, and how isolated each and every one of us is gradually becoming. On today's episode, I want to answer that big question. Why are people becoming increasingly lonely in the world? Why are we lonelier than we've ever been in our lives? And it begs the question, what then is loneliness? Before I do that, my name is Andrews, a host of the Shaft podcast, and I hope you enjoy this unique episode. Loneliness is generally the feeling of not belonging. Knowing within yourself that even though you love people, even though you express care for people, you do not think you are valued in the same way that you feel you deserve and the kind of value that you expect from people. You love, you have friends, you have relatives, you have colleagues, but you still do not feel that you belong within their social circles. You still do not feel that your social needs are being met, and therefore you gradually relate to less and less people and feel much more entrapped within yourself and less fulfilled. But loneliness is different from isolation or solitude because usually that is deliberate and planned. People deliberately decide to isolate for various reasons, to be productive, because they think that they need to clear their head, to rest and relax away from stress. And people usually communicate isolation. And even if they do not communicate to other people around them that they are isolating, most of the time there is a consciousness that you have as an individual that you are engaging in isolation or solitude, and so you have mental expectations of what to go through. But also this is more satisfactory because this is something that you want and this is something that you are engaging in. Compared to loneliness even happens when you are in the midst of many. I personally have been at parties where everybody is happy, everybody is enjoying, there's loud music, there's fun, but I still feel extremely lonely. And the reason is because loneliness is different from isolation. It is not a function of being alone. It's a function of you not feeling that you belong, whether you belong to the space that you find yourself in, to the friendship that you are engaged in, to the community that you live in, and you do not feel the value reciprocated to you at that moment or within specific periods of that experience that you are having. And so we would ask the question, why is this increasing over the years? Why is it getting worse? And why are people feeling more and more lonely? And there are so many reasons for this. The first is obviously that people are gradually having less and less time to spare to interact with other people. You may ask, then what are people doing? There are so many reasons why people are becoming busy, because the world has become so much competitive. People need to do a whole lot of things. There is much more expectation of workers. There is much more demands from school. There is much more demands from other extracurricular activities that we are doing. And there is a demand for perfection in order to succeed. And this demand means as individuals, we are usually committed to focusing on all these different things with every single ounce of time that we get, such that we forget that we are emotional beings as well, and we need to satisfy our emotional needs. And this gradually compounds the feeling of not belonging because you do not build deep-seated social connections and you gradually start to feel alone. But then in a world where this rise was happening, something popped up which everybody thought could be the fix, right? With job market, with capitalism rising, with labor demands, with productivity concerns being the benchmark, and people having to put in much more extensive shifts, even to the point that even when you are not working formally, you are still thinking about ways to improve your work rather than how to enjoy your emotional connections with people and meaningful relationships that you have. mobile phones were created with the hope of fixing this problem, such that you didn't have to be present in order to forge meaningful social relations. You could essentially be at work, but still talk to friends. You could be at home. Maybe you wouldn't be able to go for a night out because you are tired, but you could still go on a conference call and speak to friends and become emotionally interactive and express yourself in meaningful ways that still help you build connections. And so, for a lot of people who were experiencing loneliness from the onset, the very point of mobile phones and the social function that was sold to the world is that these were the tools technology is providing us to bridge the loneliness gap, to bridge the gap of social interactions, because our time that we have in the world was gradually decreasing. And so the more ease with which you could reach out to people and interact with them, the much more easier it was to find meaning within social relations, to satisfy your social demands, and to experience the value that you want people to express towards you in order to reduce the kind of loneliness that you have. But something else happened. Maybe this was not the intention, but it happened anyway. But before that, one key thing you need to note about loneliness is that it's a very subjective experience. There is no standard way of defining how loneliness feels, and there is no standard way of explaining the context within which loneliness can arise. Because a context that one person experiences extreme happiness in can be the very same context that one person is the most lonely in their entire lives. Scenarios that someone may find okay are scenarios that breed loneliness within certain people. And so we should not be quick to discount whether or not people are feeling lonely, or to speculate whether or not people are feeling lonely, because the only way to truly find out is to ask and make sure that they are telling you the truth about genuinely how they feel and whether or not they are feeling belonging within that period. And so back to mobile phones. The onset, of course, they were created to bridge this gap and enable us to speak to our friends, speak to our parents, speak to our family members, speak to our loved ones and people we have meaningful connections with, even in times where we were busy and were unable to share meaningful physical interactions. However, the internet happened, social media happened. Then the opposite rather started occurring. Instead of creating the need for us, or the ease with which we could have much more meaningful interactions with our friends and our loved ones and people we cared about, social media and the internet rather started making it worse. It rather created an echo chamber or a bubble within our phones where we were much more isolated from the people we'd love. We were much more pursuant to pleasures that were offered to us within the phones and on the internet. That created a solitary addiction that is not one that is conscious, that is not one that we opted for, but one that we've been engineered into in a way that makes us feel much more lonely. How did this happen? Two psychologists conducted a research in 2021. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge. Now, these two psychologists found out that in the timeline from the 2000s, loneliness rates were steadily rising, consistent with expectations. But in 2012, it spiked. It spiked in a rate that was significantly alarming. And the reason was simple, right? Because why is it that in 2012, social media, TikTok wasn't there at the time. Social media, the likes of Facebook, Instagram, and the internet was becoming much more popular. Cell phones were becoming much more popular. And so now people were much more drawn into their phones. And this is exactly what the researchers found out. They found that 2012 timeline equally coincided with a time when there was a boom in cell phone usage in the world, because people were now having more and more access to the internet, more and more access to cell phones, more and more access to data networks, thereby consequently more and more access to social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. But also, these platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter started re-strategizing their content to be much more addictive in ways that created more willingness to spend more time on these social media platforms rather than spending time with people around you. And this is why the cell phone solution model failed, because the tool that was meant to be used to bridge the gap and create an easy communication and facilitation between us and the people we love to reduce loneliness, that very tool eventually sucked us in and created way more loneliness, way more separation, because we couldn't interact more with our people. And yes, I'll come to exactly why this was the case, and I would spend time discussing social media and how it created all these problems. But the final thing that social media did was it redefined our source of self-worth and our sense of self. It told us that our value is now dependent on the likes that we get, on the comments that we get, on the interactions that we get. And so we are much more excited about notifications that pop up that someone liked our post. We are much more interested in every single time checking on that post and like confirming, is it 3 more people that have viewed or 100 more people? We check the timelines for these views. We check how quickly we get likes and love and heart emojis and reactions and impressions. We check all these things and tie our sense of self-worth to it. And this creates far more struggle, because then there's an anxiety built up that is only satisfied by reactions that you get on social media. And this creates a much more stronger sense of addiction and a much more stronger sense of attraction for us to constantly pursue social media in our quest to find meaningful interactions and meaningful satisfaction. But this doesn't cure loneliness, because what it did was it separated us from more people, and in fact it made us feel much more lonely in ways that I'll just describe in a bit. The next thing that happened was that there's been a popularization of narratives that tell us that it's better to be alone than to be with people. And these narratives come in various forms. And to be fair, some of these narratives are right in some instances, but in some instances they are wrong. And the applications of these narratives are not spoken of to understand ways in which they can be negatively consequential to the people who pick them up and wholeheartedly believe in them. Because there have been narratives that the herd mentality is problematic, that moving with the crowd is bad, and that you need to keep your head down, you need to isolate, you need to work hard, you need to be on your own, you do not need the crowd because the crowd is almost always moving in the wrong direction. But that is not always true, even though it is not always false. And the problem we do not realize is that we connect with people over the things we do together, not in isolation of the things we do together. Which means that even though the herd mentality may not always be right, in moments where it's right, it comes with an added benefit of building meaningful correlations, meaningful relationships, of building meaningful interactions in ways that make people feel much more belonging. These are things that you do with people, and then they comment, they compliment you, they give you senses of gratification. It improves your sense of self-worth. These are things that you do, and then people are able to compliment you, people are able to learn from you, you are able to learn from them. But then you spend time over common interests in ways that grows your deep-seated connection with these people. But a lot of us aren't doing that. And so we end up in isolated pockets, pursuing these things on our own in ways that make us much more solitary, not because we want to be, but because we are told we have to be in order to succeed and in order to make it. The painting and the illustration of communal interactions as negative and bad is creating a much more lonely society, such that people feel much more hesitant to interact with their friends, their colleagues on a much more communal level, because you want to do it alone and win alone and come out and say you did it, rather than interacting with people and being much more healthy within your social circles. That is creating a big problem, and it's time we start talking about it. We need to let people know that social norms, narratives are not absolute. They are not perfect in every single scenario. They are contextual in the experiences within which they provide, and they are contextual in the values that they elicit to people, which means that we need to start being much more clear and specific about which instances within which certain narratives work, the potential negatives around that narrative, and what instances you can use to negate those potential negatives around those narratives. So, for instance, in instances of herd mentality and communal working, and rather than being isolationist, there are times when your interest aligns with what the public is doing. There are times when your interest and your goals aligns with what everyone is doing, what your friends are doing, what your community is doing. Do it with them instead of isolating and feeling alone, because that, beyond actually probably making it easy for you and giving you much more chances of success, has a uniquely added benefit of improving your social connections, of making you feel less isolated, less lonely, and making you feel more belonging. That reduces the amount of loneliness that you feel as individuals. The third thing that this world has created to make us more lonely is hyper-competitiveness. Because we are hyper-competitive, we probably have very little time, because we want to spend every single time that we have becoming better than our peers. And that means we want to spend less time with them, because we also want to hide what we are doing from them so that we can beat them easily. But beyond that, it means we don't talk properly. It means we don't open up, we don't have meaningful conversations. And the thing about communication and conversations is that you can talk without necessarily having a conversation. You can talk without communicating, and that is much more problematic. That a lot of us today, we have talks, we speak, we illustrate, we speak on superficial things, on experiences that are not meaningful, and we really do not share the things that we deeply, truly desire to share, which means that we still feel lonely. We are bottled up into things that we want to speak about, things that we want to share, things that we want to talk about, but we never get to do so. And so that means we end up spiraling down the holes of loneliness. And that is a big, big problem. Our inability to share our struggles and feel relief and feel a sense of worth and appreciation in the midst of that quote-unquote mess, in the midst of that struggle, makes us feel much more lonely. And that means for a lot of people, that is creating a bigger problem, such that the pain points, the areas or the things that make us feel guilty, that make us feel less worthy of our friends, less worthy of our families, less worthy of our relationships, less worthy of people around us, we are unable to share them. We are unable to get them off our chest. We are unable to speak about them in ways that are meaningful enough to still get the support that we need. Because trust me, the reality is a lot of the people around you are either facing similar things or even worse. And a lot of the time when you speak about it, you are likely to get them to still affirm that we love you regardless of that experience. In fact, we trust you, we believe in you, we value you the same way we valued you before you told us this, because this is not changing in any way how we see you, how we appreciate you, and how much love and value we ascribe to you. And these experiences are the things that do not drain away our emotional connection, but improve them and make us feel much more belonging than lonely that we feel. And so, finally, let's talk about social media in much more detail, the bigger elephant in the room. Because a lot of us feel social media probably helped improve the situation. It gives us a sense of community. It gives us such that even when we are lonely, or not necessarily lonely, but even when we are alone, right, we can still interact with people on social media. The question that I want to pose to you is, what is the nature of the interactions that you have? How quality are those interactions? Put those two questions aside. How honest and frank are those interactions? How many times have you been yourself on social media? How many times have you not put up a face or a front on social media? How many times have you not projected a perfectionist view of yourself on social media? Put yourself aside, because you may be skeptical of answering these questions of yourself. Now let's think about other people. How many times have you felt that people are projecting their fake selves on social media? How many times have you felt that people are projecting perfectionist narratives on social media, which may not necessarily be true? How many times have you felt that people are living great and outstanding lives, such that you begin to question whether or not you would make it? You look at people who are younger than you, you look at people who are your age mates, you look at people you began with, and they are projecting certain senses of worth and self-worth and value and perfection that make it difficult for you to reconcile with your own practical realities, because you ask, what is wrong with me? Am I supposed to be there yet? Are these the same people that I started with? Are these people truly younger than me? Am I even living meaningful lives? Am I even living a meaningful life, right? And once you start asking yourself these questions, you start realizing that social media is not what we think it is. It is not a doom. It is not a negative, but it comes with these harms that we should understand and realize. It comes with these tricky scenarios that we do not converse about enough. It comes with these complications that we do not speak about enough to be able to understand how to interact with social media in ways that are meaningful to our experience, but also in ways that do not deepen the negatives that we feel about ourselves. So there are three things I'm just going to touch on here. The first is that social media tends to show us everything we want that we don't have. It shows us ads, it shows us pictures, posts, reels, it shows us the lives of people, it shows us the very things that we wish we were that we aren't. It shows us images of people that have body morphologies that we do not have, but we admire and aspire to have. It shows us images of people, the lives that they are living. These are lives that we want to live, but we do not have. It shows us a perfect view of the world without the practical imperfections that lay behind those images. And a lot of the time, and for a lot of us young ones who are popping up, who are growing, who are interacting with these things, we are pressured because we are made to think this is the reality. And these social media is even beyond Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. It's equally happening on LinkedIn, where people put up very huge, gargantuan, verbose, grammatic posts about things that they are doing, and you see and you feel pressured, and you think that you are not doing enough, and you think that you are not as valuable as you should be, and compared to the rest of the world, you are probably not valuable at all. And that feeling is wrong, because social media shows you a projection of a perfection that never exists. All of those people have their imperfections. All of those people have their struggles. All of those people have their own problems. And the ability to take very beautiful, nice images, very outstandingly beautiful images, make it far more worse, because then this projection of perfection continues without us necessarily seeing the negatives on the side. And what that does to us is that it makes us feel that our lives are not where they ought to be. And that makes us feel less worthy of the people around us, less worthy of the communities we exist in, less worthy of our own experiences and journeys. And that creates more and more loneliness, and more lack of self-appreciation and lack of self-worth. The second thing is the creation of echo chambers, which is the idea that you overly interact with views that align with yours. And so what social media algorithms do is that they study your preferences and then recommend those preferences to you. And so what that does is that you are always being bombarded with things that align with your preferences, your goals, your views, your thoughts. And that, even though seems great in terms of an experience, could in the unintended way make you feel far more lonely. Because what it does is it creates a sense of stagnation, that you're only experiencing things over and over again, similar things over and over again. And I personally have experienced this with Netflix, with YouTube, and with so many different social media platforms that recommend videos. Because they've recommended the similar things over and over again, that I open them and I feel bored, and I do not find anything interesting or new to watch, because it's either these are things I've watched in different forms, in different videos, in different production lines, or these are things that I've consumed to the point that they are no more interesting to me, and so it gradually becomes less and less meaningful and more boring and more lonely to be there. And so they create echo chambers that become problematic for us. What you would need is to equally be interacting with, as much as you'd like to interact with things that are meaningful and similar to your interests, you'd also want to be interacting with things that are different, things that are exciting, things that are stimulating, things that buckle your mind, so that you're able to experience the world in its fullness, in its diversity, in its holistic expression, in ways that eliminate the stagnation that you're experiencing. Also, echo chambers make you feel as if you are alienated from the world, that you are only within a bubble and you are not experiencing the real world. And much more diverse experiences eliminate this as well. Finally, cyberbullying. The fact that we are scared of being ourselves on social media because we think there would be backlash, there will be people who launch on us, there will be people who tell us things in ways that make us feel bad. And because of the anonymity that exists on social media and the projection of perfection that I highlighted, people's comments, people's thoughts tend to mean way more to us because we value those people more than we value ourselves on social media. And that is creating a bigger problem in terms of loneliness, isolation, and how much of a belonging experience that we get. This is equally leading to the increasing trends in depression, in mental health. That is what is sparking the kind of conversations that we have around mental health improvement, mental health safety, mental health control, mental health awareness and development as well. And it is a good thing. It is really, really a good thing. But in this episode, I wanted you to understand why we are becoming increasingly lonely. And understanding that would help us be much more conscious of it, would help us be much more cognizant of it, and do our best to eliminate these circumstances when they are arising. For me, there are just a few things I could say that speak your truth. How are you? For instance, is a question that we meet every single day. But usually, we equally give a template answer and fine. Start really telling the people that care enough to ask you how you are. Start really telling them how you are. Describe how you are. Describe how you are feeling. Try saying something more than the usual "I'm fine" and start a much more meaningful, deep-seated conversation that creates more and more interaction, more and more social connection, and more meaning in our existence. If you realize that you are in a space that's difficult to navigate on your own, seek help. May not necessarily be always from therapists, which is a great option if you can and can access and can afford, but it can be true friends, can be true mentors. And these mentors may not necessarily be big people who you may not have access to, you may not understand or may not understand you, but people who are just next up the ladder to you that you can communicate with, that you can relate to. Be bold enough to have conversations with them. That being said, equally be careful about who you have these conversations with, because of course we are scared about being vulnerable, but when there are people that care about you enough to accept your vulnerability in ways that they won't penalize you for in the future. And those are the people you should be looking out for and entrusting yourself and your emotional well-being into their hands anytime you need a space to be vulnerable and to express yourself. But cultivate the attitude of being emotionally open and emotionally stimulating in your everyday life. Be much more thorough when someone asks you how you are doing. Be much more expressive. Relieve the tension, relieve the stress, relieve the build-up of things that you want to speak about that you are never able to speak about. I hope that this episode helped. I hope that you learned more about loneliness and about how much it's happening to every single person around us and the factors that are creating it. And I hope that after this episode, you are much more conscious and you are able to improve in the experiences that you give yourself as an individual and the experiences that you give other people as an individual as well. Thank you very much for tuning in. See you on the next one.